Hey, I'm back. After all these months and even years, I'm back finally making videos. My videos now are going to be product and everything related. Mostly a lot of reviews. I know you see a lot of reviews on YouTube and other formats like Amazon. You'll see a lot of reviews, you read them. But I'm going to try to get out of the history game for a little bit. I was going to go to Gettysburg, make some videos, which will be followed up probably in the spring of this year of 2018. Today is March 22nd, 2018. And my first review is going to be something infamous. It's an infamous review. Something that I like. I like infamous things. I like things with history that have infamy in them. And after doing a lot of research on this item, I'm going to show you that I found out that it's really cool. It has a lot of history to it, and it's an interesting collectible, and I have a few of them. Okay, what we're going to be looking at, if everybody hears the bells and the whistles, dun, 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 we're going to be looking at this. Now, I'm taking it out slowly. This is a 007 knife. Okay, if any of you people are 50 or probably 60 years old, law enforcement, in the New York area in the 1970s, mid to late 70s, you know what this is. This is a 007 knife. Now, why are these knives so infamous, as I call it? Well, we're going to go into the history about this knife. We're going to go into some other knives. We're going to go into some comparisons. We're going to go into a lot of interesting facts and tribulations about this knife. Now, why is a knife infamous? Why are knives infamous? Well, for a long time in history, there's been blades. There was blades traded to the Indians. There was all kinds of blades that were used throughout history for all kinds of tasks, not just defense, but they were used. Axe blades. Everything was used, had something metal, and it was a useful instrument. Then you had somebody come along in the 70s, of course, because the 70s were the greatest time on the planet. The 70s came along, and good luck with the 70s, a company came in. Not China. You would think that, hey, everything's China. Well, back in the 70s, there was Hong Kong. There was, Hong Kong, Japan, Taiwan. Those were the big shippers of a lot of the stuff that they got back then. If you notice, if you look at some of your electronics or anything like that, it all came from Japan, cameras, everything. Well, there were shops in Japan that made these knives, these 007 knives. If I open it up, now I have to pull the camera in closer, but I'll do that in a minute. But if you want to take a look at these knives, it says 007 on it because it was not a Bond knife, believe you me. It was just an infamous name. It's just infamous that that name 007 knife came into existence. And it says stainless steel Japan. Now I'm going to pull in a little bit so you can take a look at this knife, and then we'll go over some of the features, and we'll go look at some other ones. So if I zoom in, we're going to take a look at this knife. It's an interesting looking knife. It doesn't look like it's that much. It doesn't have a hand guard. It doesn't have features of other knives, but it does its job for what it wants to do. As you can see in the frame here, you have 007, okay, and you got a blade. And then on the back of it, you got a recess where the blade fits in. It's very thin. And you have the lanyard at the back. So if we pull back again and talk about this knife a little bit further, okay, so we have a couple other knives that I've got in this series of these knives, these 007 infamous knives. Okay, so this is the original. I do have the original. It's in perfect condition. It's a little bit scratched on one side right here. It looks like maybe somebody would have used this knife, probably just prying something open, and then threw it into a toolbox. And that was the end of this knife. But because of somebody not using this knife, it is in absolute pristine condition. Very nice. Okay, so we're going to put the 007 away for a minute, infamous knife. And we're going to look at another infamous knife. This one has more history than any of these knives, but it is exactly the same knife. If you look at this, the black one and the wood one, they are exactly the same knife. made probably in the same factory. They're probably made by the same people. But this knife, this black knife here, has a whole different history to it than this one does. Now, but this does have some history, but this one here is infamous. If anybody knows about the 007 knife in New York and the punk Ramones, you're talking about the Sex Pistols, you're talking about all those punk, like at the Chelsea Hotel, all that other stuff, you'll know what this name is. It's the Jaguar K11Wilderness. Now, what's so special about this knife rather than the other knives I'm going to show you? This knife was purchased by Nancy Spungen. If you know who Nancy Spungen is in Sex Pistol lore, she was the girlfriend of Sid Vicious. Now, Sid Vicious was a bass player for the Sex Pistols at one point. He went off on his own. He was in different bands, and he was a young man from England. He was very young. I think he was in his 20s, early 20s. Nancy Spungen, they had met. Nancy was a groupie. She was a groupie for multiple bands. She was from Philadelphia. She was Jewish. She had a unique accent. She had a unique voice, as everybody seems to claim. Now, the knife and them are infamous because they were indeed, they had problems with drugs, they had problems with alcohol, and they had problems with partying, as everybody did during that time in the 70s. Now, what was different about their partying is that in the 70s there was more of a cocaine issue. This was a heroin issue. They had very problems. They had a lot of problems with heroin. Now, heroin back in the 70s, during that time, 76 and 77 era, was kind of hard to find. So basically, a lot of the heroin wasn't as pure, and if somebody was a junkie from overseas that came to the United States, which Sid Vicious was, he had a heroin habit, he had to go on a methadone. Now, how does this all play into it? How does the drugs in this knife play into it? Well, because this knife is infamous, it's infamous for only one reason. Now, the one reason is it's a black and white picture of this knife. It's taken by the New York City Police Department. I think it was 1979. Don't quote me on that, 78 or 79. Now, this knife is shown in the New York City Police photographs. Now, it's sitting on a briefcase in a room. It's sitting in the room at the Chelsea Hotel, number 101, of course. It's the infamous room that Sid Vicious and Nancy Spungen both rented after they came back from England, and then they came to New York, and that's where they stayed. So this is in a black and white photo. Okay, we know that. It was clean. It was just like this, sitting like this. There was not a lanyard on it. This one has a lanyard. It had no lanyard. It was sitting on top of a briefcase with this Wilderness K11 Jaguar name. Clearly you can see that it was this knife. And why is this knife infamous? Okay, the knife is infamous because they assumed that this was the knife that killed Nancy Spungen. She was stabbed right below her belly button. It was early in the morning, they think. Looking at different autopsy reports, it looks like the blade was made a hole that was 1 inch, and this is basically 1 inch across. Now, it's big enough to go far enough into you to kill you. She bled out. Now that Sid Vicious had woken in the morning, it was a party, and everybody from the party had left. He had woke up. He was, I guess he was had a little problem with not getting heroin that morning, so he went to the methadone clinic. It was around 6 in the morning. He looked into the bathroom and saw Nancy Spungen in the bathroom. She had blood on her, and he had definitely wiped some of the blood off, and he wasn't even coherent. He went in and he left her in the bathroom bleeding to go get his methadone. So when he came back, from reports that I know, that when he went into the bathroom to check on Nancy Spungen in the morning, she was still alive. She might have been grunting or something like that. But when he came back from the methadone clinic, she was deceased. She died. She bled out and died. Now, infamous knives is that this knife was found in the hotel room after the interviews. The police came in. The police were called into the room. Nancy was pronounced dead. Sid Vicious was coming down from drug-induced stupor that night, so he was being questioned by the police. I think at a couple points he denied it, and then finally he said, I don't know if I did it or not, and that was more than enough for the New York City Police Department to issue an arrest warrant for Sid Vicious. During that time, when they found the body, they took pictures of Nancy, they took pictures of the bed, the room, and also this infamous knife, this bad boy of a knife. Now, this is the infamous one. We're going to look at a couple other ones, but this is the most infamous of the group. But like I said before, these are all the same knife. These are all made in Japan. They're all the same length. To an extent, they're all the same length. The larger ones are very large. Now, to break off from the Sid and Nancy issue, we're going to look at some of the specifications of these knives and why were they so infamous. So if you look at this, it is a folder, okay? You got to be very careful. It folds. Now, we're going to take a look at the length without the lanyard, of course. Now, if we measure this knife, fold it, okay? It's going to measure, this is the Sid and Nancy knife, the Jaguar K11. The knife is about 6.5 inches long. That's about as big as your pocket. So if you put this in your back pocket in Levi's jeans, it's just basically going to stick out a little bit. Now this lanyard is used for taking your knife. This one's a little longer. If you notice, the lanyard on this one is longer. Now these are original. These are exactly the way the lanyards were on these knives. I didn't replace anything. Now if you look at the original 007, you'll see it's smaller. Now, there was a function for these lanyards also on these knives. This one was for pulling it out of your pocket. Okay, you couldn't get your hand in here. This was only for just taking it and yanking it out of your pocket. This one's a little different. If you notice, it's longer on this Jaguar. Now, the reason for that is quite clear. You put your hand in the lanyard, you hold it, and now you can take the knife out, and then you can hold it, and then it won't come out of your wrist. I mean, it's pretty much in there. I mean, it's pretty steady. Now, why would you have a lanyard like this on a wilderness knife? Wilderness means, I don't know, I'm going to use it in the wilderness, you know, deer, whatever. You know, but these were not used for that. These knives were not used in that capacity. These knives were good for one thing and one thing only. They were meant for flicking open very, very fast, and also they were meant to cut you. There is no doubt in my mind that any type of use for this knife was rather just to cut somebody. And the biggest feature about these, not only the large size, because the size of these knives is something to be talked about. If you take a look at this knife, I'll measure it, okay? You're going to take there, it's 12 inches. 12 inches. That's from the handle, which fits in my hand, and I do have some extra from grabbing it. Even if I was up further, there's still more. Now, you have to look and you have to respect these knives, because I want to show you a demonstration. You take your forearm. Now look how big this is. I'm 6'2". Now my arms are pretty long. This knife is as big as your forearm. They know that. They told you this. They said, oh, that 007, man, that's so big, it's as big as your forearm. Watch this. It is absolutely correct. It is as big as your forearm. It is humongous. Now, I want to show you a demonstration of just how large this is sticking out. Okay, we put the Wilderness K11. I like this knife. I'm not downing the 707. I'm just using this as a demonstration. Now take a look at this. We're going to look at another knife that was popular with soldiers at this time. They were coming back from Vietnam. But this is definitely not a carrying knife. But I want to show you the difference. This is a K-bar knife. Okay, K-bar is a knife. It's from, of course, New York. You know, it's from that area, a little up north. But these were brought home by soldiers during Vietnam. They could have been brought back during World War II. Your grandfather in the 70s probably had a knife like this in the Navy or the Marines. Now, the reason why I have this knife is because these were around too in the 70s. Now, why weren't these popular, and why were these popular? Now, let's take a look. If you look at both these knives, you'll notice a big, big difference. They are about the same damn size, considering one's a folder and one is not a folder. It's a knife that does not fold. So we're going to look at the size of the K-bar. Now the K-bar is just a little over 12 inches. It's probably 13 inches long. That's pretty big. But if you compare it to the 007, The 007 is 12 inches. That's incredible. That's as big as this knife. This is a huge knife, just by looking at it on camera. This is big. This is a military knife. It could have been put on a bayonet. It could be used in combat, used for self-defense. But you couldn't carry this around. You can't stick this anywhere because the sheath is too big, and trying to retrieve this thing, it scared the hell out of anybody, even yourself. That's where this comes in. This knife comes into its own for a couple reasons. Now we're talking about the 70s. We're not talking about today's knives. This isn't a review of today's knife. This is about the equipment that was infamous in the 70s. Okay, you got a knife as big as the K-bar. Look at this. It goes this big. It fits into your pocket. Okay, and look at the feature. It flicks. It flicks. And this isn't even a good one that flicks. This is flicking average. I have one that can flick out in a split second. Now we'll go into the flicking. Let's take a look at all these different knives that came out. We had the 007. This is a 007. This is a real 007. Okay, this is the infamous one. Now it's a little lighter than the Wilderness, but like I said, they are absolutely the same exact knife.